in painting classes. Now, just a little while ago, this was a much cooler painting, and I did a very heavy glazing. I switched it from a cool blue pale painting to warm evening brown, orange, and so forth. Uh, in fact, I did a similar thing in all three paintings. This one was already somewhat warm, and I just warmed it up a little bit by glazing it. Again, none of these are finished. These were all started in classes. And here's another one, pretty old one, in fact. But I still like quite a bit. With a little bit of work, that could be a nice painting. So I plan to do right now some of that little bit of work and kind of walk you through the process. So again, anytime that I have the opportunity to go into a painting on a second day, I almost always start by doing a transparent glaze of whatever colors I want, any colors I want. And in this case, I did some permanent rose, orange, Indian yellow, and oxide red. So in other words, I just redded and oranged it up a great deal. As I said, this was a daytime yellow green picture. You can ask me, why did I make it yellow? Why did I make it yellow and brown? Because I thought it'd be a better painting. I've actually done this scene several times before because it's one that I use. Hey Edward, go to sleep, man. Thanks for checking in. Down here is the photograph. Oh, this would be instructive. So there's the photograph my photograph that I'm doing the painting from, and here's what my painting looks like so far. Now, like, your first response would be like, wow, that's different. Exactly. Now, am I using the photograph? Oh, yes, definitely. I'm using it for specific realistic details. Like, what does it look like in this case when a branch falls down, a big limb off this tree? See, I'm copying the tree. I'm getting ideas, many ideas, from the details in the photograph, but of course I'm changing the lighting drastically. And of course, yes, you may do the same thing. Our goal as artists is virtually never to copy the photograph. I seem to be having a hard time getting my brush to make the kinds of marks that I want. Sometimes I'll dip it in Turpenoid or Gamsol, whatever it is I'm using, to rinse out my brushes on occasion, so that the paint will flow. Just, you don't want too much Gamsol, but a little bit's okay. Okay. And again, it's a little bit of a clinic right at the moment in how to paint trees. The number one word, if you had to reduce it to one word, how do you paint trees? The answer is layers. Layers and layers. Pardon me for a moment. I have to fix my background music that is you can't hear it, but I can, and it's irritating me. So hang on here real quick. There we go. I'm hoping you can't hear my music. If you can, then once again, YouTube will be sending me complaints. They're very nice about it, though. Much nicer, by the way, than Facebook. That's part of the reason I switched from Facebook to YouTube, is that YouTube is much more willing to listen to you than Facebook was. I got bumped off Facebook a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. I got bumped off because somebody else was playing music while I was painting. And they bumped me off for 6 weeks, I believe, which I believe was a little bit extreme for a first-time offense. That wasn't exactly my fault. So at the time, I said, well, you know what? I have 3,500 followers on Facebook, 40,000 followers on YouTube. What do you say we just make a mass exodus toward toward Facebook, so toward YouTube. So that's what I did. So after doing the glaze, what you've been watching me do here, after the glaze is basically the last 3 steps of my painting process are glaze, dark details, light details. It's a little more complicated than that. If you follow me, you know what I'm talking about. But that's basically it. So I do those last 3 phases all over again. Glaze, dark details, and then light details. And of course, the word details has to be put very much in quotation marks. I call what I'm doing right now details. And it's not very detailed details. Do you follow me? Not very detailed details. Right. You heard that right. And most of what I'm doing right now is transparent. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of green in this painting here and there. I don't want the whole thing brown. Let's get some green going here and there. Yeah, let's do some green in this tree up here. Not too green because, you know, in a twilight sunset lighting or sunrise lighting, the greens aren't going to be too terribly green. Everything in a painting, everything in a scene is colored literally by the color of the light. Everything is impacted by the color of the sun. And in this case, the sun is very red-orange. So the green is going to be a very subdued green. That's what I'm trying to do down here. And I'm painting at this point mostly in transparent colors. I'll do opaque later. I'm going to get a bigger brush to do some of this for. I also want some. I do want some green down here in this foreground. So let's get that brushed in, roughed in. I want it to look like partly fall time of year, you know, brown leaf time of year, but not completely. I want it a little bit of green, and again, everything cast in this sunset orange color. So the green is not. We have an expression in our painters group. We used to say it more. We had our painters group last night, as I'm speaking to you right now today, and there were a couple of paintings that were put in front of us that we could have said in unison. We could have said green is a very dangerous color. Somehow we managed not to go. We managed to go the whole evening without saying that. It's been said a lot of times before, but evidently it needs to be said some more times. Green is a very dangerous color. It's been a long time since I talked about that. Let me explain at least a little bit why. I believe it has to do with the way the physiology of our eyeballs, the way our eyeballs are made. That you heard in high school biology or junior high biology, you heard about eyes having rods and cones, right? And the rods see light and dark values, and the cones see color. Correct. But my observation, and I'm not a scientist, but my observation is if that's the case, well, it's not straight up the case, because the cones, the part of our retina that picks up color, bleeds over into values. In other words, some colors, just pure colors, show up as brighter in our eyeballs. And the brightest of those is the lightest, brightest color that we can see is a bright chartreuse green. Or in other words, the brightest color we can see is not white or yellow, it's green. That's why many safety vests, school crossing signs, pedestrian crossing signs, and many fire trucks are painted this lime green, bright, bright, bright chartreuse green, because it's the last color to disappear in dark twilight or dark smoke. It's the brightest color we can see. So you have to take that into account when you use green in your painting. And the colors, the greens that paint manufacturers make for us are almost universally way too bright. Way too bright. So almost any time that you're using a green in your painting, especially if you're a traditional opaque painter, you want to cut that green with the complementary red or reddish brown or orange or purple, something like that. Something pretty far across the color wheel from green. Red is the most extreme, but you can use a gentle red, like a brownish red or something like that if red scares you too much. But in most cases, your greens that you put on your canvas should be cut. Now, in this case, because I'm applying the greens transparent on top of brown, that's how I'm mixing. I didn't mix red with my green, but I mixed it on the canvas. I'm sure that you understand that completely. Okay, nearly finished with the dark details of this painting. By the way, the photograph did not have any power lines, telephone poles in it at all. I added those, and it didn't have any fences in it. And I truncated this shed quite a bit and then added a square thing down here. All of that is invented to the scene, things that are not there. And of course, the coloring in general is added to the scene. I just realized just now, I also want to add a bush, a bare, mostly bare tree, scrubby tree here in the foreground down here, I decided. It really is a great advantage to paint tree limbs with two hands instead of one. You can get it done twice as fast, I like to say. Kind of joking, but kind of not joking. And you'll notice that I'm using filbert brushes, which are far and away my favorite kind of brush. And I'm twirling them, spinning them between my fingers as I make these lines so that I get a variety of shapes. I'll also do quite a bit of scratching. Getting a little bit of kind of Richard Schmid-ish scratch marks there. I think I'm going to add one more fence that is not in the photograph at all. It's just editorial, making stuff up here. The photograph that I took was actually taken very close to Monument, Colorado, just 40 miles maybe north of Pikes Peak, right up the main highway there. I forget what highway it is. And it was actually an abandoned farm. I climbed over a fence, a gate at the road to get in while my friends stayed in the car. They were not as excited about trespassing as I was. Here's a fun. I'm not usually a name dropper, but this is just kind of fun. This particular day that I was out painting with a couple of friends, one older friend, one brand new friend. The brand new friend was named Matthew Ward. And some of you know who Matthew Ward is. That's all I'm going to say about that. It's kind of funny. It was delightful. He's a pretty good singer. For those of you who wonder who I'm talking about, you can Google him now. Just do Matthew Ward singer, and you'll know who I'm talking about. That was an interesting, fun day. Just a funny name. It's just funny because I'm here. I've painted from this scene so many times now, and there was a quasi-famous guy sitting in the car with me while I trespassed on this property. Life's funny. This is probably a good place for me to take a quick break. I just don't want this episode to be, an hour long. So I'm going to paint a little while without you, and I'll bring you in a little while. The next thing I'm going to do is fuzz layer, and then the layer is light opaque highlights. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll be back in just. Hello, Natalie. Thank you for joining me from Moscow. I'm sure. I'm sorry I missed your comment earlier. So I decided to bring you back in a little earlier than I had expected. So I'm doing what I call the fuzz layer. This is one of the last developments in my ever evolving technique. And by the way, I hope that your technique is ever evolving as well. That's all I'm going to say about that. Just keep on growing. So this is pretty recent for me. I think a year and a half ago. Well, coming up on 2 years now. That's pretty, boy, time flies. This is what I call the fuzz layer, characterized by messiness, translucent, and I am expecting you to understand the difference between the words translucent and transparent. I'm not going to define those for you. You figure it out. This is translucent, messy, soft edges, and typically characterized by local color. Again, local color is the funny word that artists use when they mean realistic color, actual color. Roses are red, violets are blue. The sky is blue, grass is green. That's called local color. And I've done a bunch in the sky, a bunch of fuzz in the sky. You just saw me do a little bit here on this roof. I don't really need to do much around this window. It's already very fuzzy. But down here in the foreground, I want to do a little bit. And yes, the fuzz layer always makes me nervous. And painting with two hands definitely helps me, because it goes against everything. It is a complete affront, if I can use that language. It's a complete affront to any remaining control freak tendencies that I have left, which are not many, but if I have any, they're being exercised when I'm doing this crazy. It's hard to make myself do messy, but I keep telling myself, and I hold up in front of my eyes people that I respect, like Tibor Nagy, Richard Schmid, and who else does good messy? Those two will do for now. So I just try to think, okay, Tibor would do it. he wouldn't be shrinking back from this messiness at this moment, so neither will I. So of course the paints that I'm using right now, all the colors I'm using have white in them. They are opaque paints, but applied very thinly, so that they end up being translucent. Opaque paint applied thinly, of course, equals translucence. At the moment now I'm doing some green, some messy green. I've got 2 stages, 2 layers, 2 phases to go before this painting is finished. I think a little while ago I misspoke and said I have 1 layer. Well, that's the old tradition. My new tradition, again, in my ever-evolving technique, is I'm going to do a little bit of black pencil on top of this fuzz. Okay, too much fuzz, I don't want that. Not enough, I don't want that either. So basically this fuzz layer is forcing me, at gunpoint, forcing me to create a whole bunch of soft edges. So that's what I've done. There was one painting I did a few months ago. After doing the fuzz layer, I went, whoops, I think I overdid it. I actually did too many soft edges. Now, back to some colored pencil stuff. Not colored, black and white pencil. And why am I doing pencil? Again, this is a fairly recent development. not as recent as the fuzz layer, but 2-3 years in my ever evolving technique. And the reason I do pencils is because I like the juxtaposition of smushy paint against scratchy pencil lines. I like the way those two things look, interacting, contrasting with each other. Of course, coincidentally, they create my pencils. I'm using, and I think you know this if you follow me, it's called Jerry's Artorama Jumbo Jet Black. It's sort of, it was described to me as a Conti crayon in a pencil form. It's kind of like that. It makes real spidery, wispy lines most of the time. And as you can see, I'm not using them much for realism. I'm not using them to draw carefully placed lines. A little tiny bit maybe, but not much. Mostly I'm just using them for effect. I'm just using them to create marks in contrast to the paint marks. And it is the contrast is what I like. Okay, I think that's enough. Now, final layer, and I'll let you watch me for a few minutes, and then I'm sure I'll take my departure from you again. The final layer is always light, so white is in it, white paint of titanium white. Light, opaque bits, sparkle, highlights, any of those words will work. Light, now my painting is 95% finished, but this last 5% is critical. It's the most important single layer is this layer, even though it only covers 10 or 15% of the canvas will have this layer. Now, again, I say this all the time, but for those of you who are new, 4 options, 4 places to start with this last layer. Number 1, the farthest away thing, which in a landscape is always the sky. Start far and work forward. That's option number 1. Option number 2, start at the focal point and move out. Option number 3, start with the lightest, brightest, whitest thing, which in this case is the sky near the horizon, and get dark from there. And number 4 is local color. If there's some big object in the painting that just is not the right color, like for instance, I could do this. I want this, some of this up here, and I'm sorry, that's just complete glare to you, isn't it? I don't know if we can help that or not. Let me try to move you around a little bit. I want that sky to be blue. So that's, yeah, there we go. So that's an example. Right now it's just a very dark, I like it, but it's dark and muddy. I'm going to do some sky blue up there. That would be one little bit of local color that I want fixed. But that's not where I'm going to start. I think this time around, focal point or sky. I'm going to start with the sky. So again, there's 4 different places to start this last layer. One of them is the furthest away object. That's in other words, that's traditional oil painting. Traditional oil painting is an opaque medium, so you could start with the furthest away thing and then build paint on top of that. But I feel like that's a good place for me to start. So I'm trying to mix up the right color, of course. I want a pale yellow orange. Essentially what's already there, just 1 tick lighter than what's already there. I feel like I'm just 2 ticks, a little bit too bright. Let me try. Nope, too bright. So let me darken that with some orange. I don't have to erase that or remove that mark, I don't believe. There we go. There we go. So now, by the way, there's a pencil line. I don't know if you can see it. It's pretty faint, but it goes right through there. And I do this trick, this little trick a lot, where I draw something often with a pencil or with a brush, real skinny, and then I actually accentuate that mark in the subsequent opaque, which is right now, in the subsequent opaque layer by painting up to that line. In this case, that would have to be a telephone wire, a telegraph wire, a power line that's going through the sky. And whereas, as you can already tell, when I was at this ranch about 5 or 6 years ago, it was quite abandoned. And as you can see by the lights in the windows, I am painting it not abandoned. So just my prerogative, of course, as you know. So that makes the power lines just a little bit more believable. When I was there, I didn't see any power lines. I don't know if I just didn't pay attention, but there aren't any in this photograph anyway. Now, I think you can see this. You'll notice that when I say I'm painting opaque, many times that word opaque has to be put in quotation marks, so to speak, opaque, because I'm using opaque paint, but much of the time I'm applying it thinly enough. I'm allowing the texture of the canvas, the little dots, the little bumps in the canvas texture to determine what gets painted and what doesn't. I'm painting in a very painterly manner, if I would give it any label at all. I'm just painting very much like an artist. Now let me darken this so I added some oxide red, which is brown, of course. Oxide red is brown, very similar, very close to burnt sienna. And then some orange. I don't even know what orange this is. I don't use cads or cobalts in my paints. I find I don't need them at all. And since they cause cancer in California, I don't live in California. I know that's a joke, bad joke, but still, why take the chance? If I don't need those colors, then I want to be able to paint for 30 or 40 more years without any too much toxins in my body. So I don't know what color orange it is, but it might be a cad orange imitation. Orange is the hardest. If you don't use cads, reds are no problem, yellows are no problem. Oranges are a little bit of a challenge if you're trying to avoid cadmiums. Yeah. I'm trying to decide if I've got too many power lines. Is it divided up too much? I don't think so. I think I like it all right. Okay, so let me give you a quick primer class clinic on if you don't use CADs, then what do you use for reds? Here are my, and I have a whole YouTube video on this, but let me just talk while I'm painting. Here are the reds that I use that makes me not have to use CADs at all. They are, starting on the dark and purple end of the spectrum, Permanent Rose. I love Permanent Rose. It's transparent. It's one of the many colors that we have as artists that you'd be very hard pressed to tell me where it shows up on the color wheel, because on a traditional color wheel there is no Permanent Rose. There's no magenta. Well, how do we have it as a color then if it's not on the color wheel? That's a long story. Part of it is ultraviolet rays shifting our color. Part of it is they exist in the color sphere, whereas they don't exist in the color wheel. You might have to Google that. What is a color sphere? Turns out a color wheel is just the slice across the equator of a color sphere. The North Pole is white, typically. The South Pole is black, and so on. That's all I'm going to say about that. So the three colors I use are Permanent Rose, Naphthol Crimson, or not Naphthol Light, Naphthol Crimson, which is a dark blood red, tending toward the cool end of the red spectrum, tending slightly more purplish than yellowish. Are you with me? So I start out with a very purplish red called Permanent Rose, which is a very transparent red, which is very important. And then from there I go to a Naphthol Crimson, which is a dark, deep red, and then Scarlet Lake. Oh, again, I love Scarlet Lake. Love all three of these colors. Scarlet Lake tends toward the warm end of the red spectrum. That is, it's yellowish. And it's also transparent. The word lake, I believe, means transparent. So whenever you see a lake color, at least traditionally, that used to mean transparent. And if I'm incorrect, I want somebody to correct me about that. This sky is really, really starting to come alive. I'm liking it. Now I'm doing tree holes. How do you do tree holes? The answer is very carefully. I said tree holes. I mean, traditionally called sky holes. They ought to be called tree holes. They're traditionally called sky holes, and they ought not to be called that, because what if this is a building behind the tree? Then it would be a building hole. That's silly. It's just silly terminology. But it shouldn't be called sky hole. It should be called a tree hole. Nevertheless, I wasn't there the day they made up the name. As one of my women students said, couple years ago, I was talking about this. She said, "God forbid your donkeys get loose on the other side of your tree." I'm sorry. You edit that out. I might get in trouble for naughtiness. Anyway, that was just hilarious. Oh, I don't usually do off-color jokes on this channel, do I? But that one's just too good to miss. God forbid your donkeys get loose on the other side of your trees. So the three reds, you got that? Permanent Rose, Naphthol Crimson, and Scarlet Lake. Is it supper time, Lakey Poo?
Yes.
Oh, here, let me show everybody. Lakey came to tell me it's supper time.
Hi.
Wait. Say it again. Say hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Lakey Poo. Appreciate that. Okay, so that's a good place for me to pause right there. I'll be back in a little while after supper. Hallelujah. And I will come and finish this painting. It's 97% done. Do you like it, Lake? Is it pretty?
I love it.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Talk to you guys in a while. Hey, gang. I'm back. And I've been working mostly on the sky since we left. Well, actually, I've had interruptions to my interruptions, if you know what I mean. But that's all right. It's all important. And so I'm finally back to painting, and it's 10:15 at night, just about time to quit painting, but I really want to get more work done, so I had a little cup of coffee. So I'm painting on drugs here. A little bit of caffeine to keep me going. And I'm nearly finished with this sky. And the whole sky, by the way, has really been more other than some of these initial sky holes that I did down here near the horizon, everything else has been actually more in line with my fuzz layer, soft edges and translucent, very much translucent colors. I'm happy with the sky. Let me see how this looks to you guys. Still a kind of a bad glare from the lights that are behind us, so I'm trying to help you get a more realistic view of what it looks like. I enjoy skies. I remember in 1976, I was a young art student, and I walked into a gallery and saw this. This was in Michigan, and saw a show of an artist who painted basically nothing but skies. I've always remembered that show for some reason, and I thought, wow, I could do that. And the fact is, yes, I really could. I enjoy skies so much. The challenge, one of the biggest challenges I have with painting skies, however, is trying to resist control painting, trying not to slip into realism per se. Again, because I feel like I'm really good at rendering believable skies, but that's not in keeping with my painting technique. So what I have to do is be careful that I'm still making messes, if you know what I mean, that accidentally look like skies. I don't want to start, again, what I call rendering the heck out of skies. So I want to do abstract skies, which is a challenge. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to do here. Trying to keep it messy. The sky in this painting, as it turns out, and I suspect this may be the case. I did one other painting of this scene that went this direction. That is, that the sky was the sort of the star of the show. Was this dramatic sunset sky. And I didn't know if this one was going to go that way or not. Okay, just you'll notice, by the way, that the last color I'm doing, at least for now, the last color I'm doing on the sky is blue, which is, I hope, counterintuitive, because traditional oil painting, traditional opaque oil painting, in traditional opaque oil painting, the artist starts with the furthermost object and moves forward, painting opaque on top of whatever he's painted previously. That would mean that you would start with the blue sky because that's the furthest away, and then the clouds in front of that. But doing it this way, where I actually did the clouds first and I'm doing the sky second, it's like sky holes in the tree. Part of the reason why sky holes are effective and fun is because everybody knows, when they look at this tree, they know that these branches in the real world, these branches and leaves are closer than the sky. Check. I'm waiting for that to sink in. Got it? The trees are close, sky's far. But the paint, the sky paint is on top of the tree, creating this tiny little, almost microscopic confusion about what's on top of what. And anytime you can create, I believe, anytime you can create that little, what I just called a microscopic or nanosecond of visual confusion, unlike in most of the world, we don't like to be confused, but when it comes to visual art, we actually enjoy the sensation of mild confusion. And so I'm accomplishing the same thing here by painting the blue sky, which everybody knows the blue sky is far away and the clouds are in front of the blue sky, but I'm painting the blue sky on top of the cloud layer, which again creates that little bit of intellectual, of dissonance, momentary mental dissonance, which we find pleasant. Now, you're going to ask, why do we find it pleasant? I don't know. That's getting pretty, that's a good question. It's my job to know that, that we do. I don't really know why we do, but I know that we do. Okay, so I'm just about done. Actually, I need to do one more thing, at least one more thing with this guy. And this is following the conventional wisdom. So this is not a weird Dan Nelsonism. This is me being traditional. The conventional wisdom is darks first, lights last. So and I didn't quite follow that in this sky. I started down here with this lightest off-white, warm yellow, light, pale orange yellow, way down here close to the hill. And then I got darker as I went up. That is, so that I did light paint and then dark paint. If you follow me, violating the principle, darks first, lights last. Now, if it didn't matter, I wouldn't worry about it. But the fact is, it does matter in this case. And I find it ever so slightly irritating. In other words, this is not a good time to break the rule. All rules can be broken, but this is not a good time to break that rule. So I am going to come back now with the lightest pale yellow that I started with, and paint it on top of the slightly more orange, darker paint above it. Okay, then another way to say that principle, lights first, darks, another way to say it is we, human beings, like to see light paint on top of dark paint. We do not like to see dark paint on top of light paint, which is what we had just a minute ago, because I did this light and then did darker on top of it. So I'm rectifying that situation right now by coming back and doing the light paint again on top of the dark. So again, there are times when you can break the rules, but this is not one of them. This is a time for knowing the rule. The rule is light paint on top of dark. By the way, I see that, you know, when I'm judging shows and so on and so forth, when I'm looking at student work, I see this principle violated all the time, and it is not a pleasant experience. It's not always my job to open my mouth and teach all the time. But so some of the time, understand, I'm biting my tongue. I wish I could tell you. I wish this was the right time for me to tell you. Here's the rule. Light paint on top of dark. So I think I'm just about done. I've had a real fun time doing these sky holes. Let me zoom in here real quick just so you can see. In this one tree, both trees, the effect is the same. But I've had a lot of fun tonight doing how many different colors of paint? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different colors of sky behind that tree. And I haven't even done the tree yet. That will have a couple different colors. Same thing, basic, not quite as many, but same thing over here. Given the choice, our eyes, our brain, given the choice, our eyes would rather, I like to say it this way, our eyes would rather, yes, see, than not see. Given the choice, our eyes would rather see, yes, than not see. That is the most fundamental driving force behind my painting, all good painting, is our eyes never get tired of seeing. And given the choice, they would rather see more, not less. I keep finding little bits I need to... I didn't bring these, this area of the sky down quite far enough, I don't think. So a little bit more sky. One of these days, again, I'm going to do an entire broadcast or an hour on how to paint, just focusing on how to paint trees, which is two things: how to understand how trees grow, and this is a weird tree, but it still follows many of the typical. What I mean by a weird tree, let me show you the photograph that I'm working from. See, I think it's a Western cottonwood. Like, I wouldn't swear, but I think this photograph taken in Colorado. I think it's a Western cottonwood, and I don't know if it's died and then new growth, a different tree is coming and growing inside it, or if just the outer branch. But that's unusual. But I am trying to reflect that. It's a fun looking, interesting, definitely not a boring, ordinary looking tree. Definitely an interesting tree. Right now, I'm skinifying, making skinny a few of the branches that I drew very quickly, which is the way to draw branches, is quickly, but some of them got a little bit fat. So I'm coming in here and making them skinny, or as I said a second ago, I'm skinifying, thinning, narrowing some of these branches. Okay, I think I'm done with the sky. Let's jump to the next thing. I'm going to come down here to the distant hill. So in a sense, right now, I'm painting very much like a traditional oil painter, starting far away and moving forward. Nothing wrong with that. With each painting, this final layer which is I call light opaque highlights. This final layer, you can start in any one of several different places. And tonight I started with the sky, which is very much the traditional approach, the furthermost object. So I'm going to continue that for the moment and now paint this distant hill. This does not need much painting at all. It's almost perfect just the way it is. And it's essentially underpainting showing through. And what is it? It's layers, it's several layers of acrylic and oil paint all piled up on top of each other. The main thing I have to do, I feel like it's a little bit too busy. That is the texture. And what I mean by texture is literally the bumps of the canvas are making some of this mountain a little too bumpy. So I'm just scumbling on some pale blue-green paint to actually push the mountain back a little bit. Now there's something pretty important I need to do. Well, I've got this blue-green color on my brushes, and that is paint sky holes. Whoa, wait a minute. Okay, I joked about this earlier. We should not have called them sky holes, but I wasn't at the meeting. I was not invited to the meeting where somebody decided we should call those things sky holes. Perfectly appropriate when it's up here, but now I'm painting hill holes because it's not the sky, it's a hill, or mountain holes. Again, so we should have called them tree holes from the get-go, but I was not invited. They didn't ask me, but they made a dumb mistake when whoever decided to call them sky holes, because now I'm doing same exact principle, but the color on my brushes is now the color of this distant mountain. It's not the color of the sky. So I'm definitely not doing sky holes. I'm doing mountain holes. I hope you're catching the silliness of that. But we're stuck with language. Language comes to us and we don't always get to vote. So that I want to be sure I've got this distant hill, kind of consistently showing all the way across the painting. I don't want it just suddenly disappearing once it hits these trees. This might be a good time. Let me teach you a little bit about painting trees. Man, I'll resist the temptation to really get into it. I'll just touch on it. When you're doing sky holes, most often the most prevalent location for those holes is on either side, is on the left and the right of a major trunk. And I just did it right here. There was a dark line right here. So, and okay, here's another one. Anyway, I know you can't see that. I don't know if you know you can see it even when I zoom in that far. Here's a big chunk of the tree, right? So on the one side of it, I do a mountain hole. And on the other side of it, I do a mountain hole. That looks like a tree. Same thing over here. I'm going to do another one here. So it's on both sides of that trunk. While we're at it, a little bit over here. Here's another one I'd already done right here. Do you see? Now, someday I'll explain why is it that the sky holes, quote unquote, that the sky holes show up most often on either side of the major limbs. The reason is because the leaves do not grow on major limbs. Leaves grow on the twigs out at the edge, at the orb, the sphere of the tree. They don't grow, leaves don't grow through all the middle of the tree. The inside of the tree is mostly bare branches. Most of the foliage on a tree is in the outer edge, the outer rim. Therefore, the visual impact is that very often, like here's a good example where you see big, thick trunks and you're almost seeing right straight through the, anyway. Here you see big, thick chunks, and you're seeing almost straight through the tree. There's no foliage. Foliage here, by the way. That's another. How are trees made? Usually They're made like ice cream cones. Scoop number one, then a little indentation. In this case, it's a big gap. Scoop number one and scoop number two, scoop number three. That's how most, and not all, you'll have to use your eyes to figure out if it's a typical tree or an unusual tree. But that's a good way to think of trees. Let me show you the photograph up here. And again, this is a weird tree in many regards, but it's typical in this regard. Here's the first scoop of ice cream cone, of ice cream. The second one is off to the side. See, one, and you see the daylight in between those two? There's one scoop, there's the other scoop. This tree, the first scoop is very wide, and then there's a gap right there, and here's the second scoop. Okay? So again, just some of the anatomy. If you understand how a tree is structured, it'll help you paint a more convincing tree. Okay, so maybe I'm done, almost done with this green mountain color, pale bluish green. And again, everything I'm doing here, none of this has been opaque. Now, let's do a classic trick right here. This could almost be called a cliche if you do it too much. But I'm going to try to not do it too much. And that is, if you want your mountain to look like it's far away, it's already doing it somewhat. You make it fade. In other words, the darker part of the mountain is up here, and as that goes down, it gets lighter. So I've just mixed up a little bit of pale yellow. It's actually Naples yellow with that green. And I'm going to come in here and again paint this distant mountain, scumbling in very, very, very thin layers, but making the mountain get lighter as it goes down and tucks in behind this closer hill. This hill, as you can see, is much closer to us and has individual trees growing on it. Okay, so this is what I'm doing right now is a sort of a classic Bob Rossism. Okay. This is just one of those, and therefore I'm in danger of overdoing. It's also a classic Thomas Kincaidism. It's also a classic G. Harveyism. But I don't think I'm overdoing it. I'm going to keep it fairly subtle so that I'm not just painting mindless tradition. Okay. But this is very, very typical little trick to make it look. Now, when you look at mountains and when you look at photographs, they literally do appear this way because of the thickness of the atmosphere and so on. The Smoky Mountains are famous for this. If you don't, if you paint the most Smoky Mountains, look at a good photo. Just Google Smoky Mountains and look at the photograph. You'll see band after band after band of bluish mountains, and each one starts dark, gets lighter, starts dark, gets lighter, starts dark, gets lighter. Each and every one. That's most typical. It has to do with the atmosphere. So I'm reflecting that, even though it's not very visible in my photo up there. See, this doesn't quite follow the rule. But I feel like for this painting, it's just easier to just go with the rule, if you will, rather than the exception. Now, I'm also, by doing this, I'm also finishing drawing the roof of this cabin. Because I'm painting the cabin in reverse, right? I'm painting what isn't cabin. Do you follow me? Okay, yeah. Now, again, a little bit of this. Again, more mountain holes. Now it's mountain mist. If I'm calling this the mist between, now I'm painting mountain mist holes. How much easier would it be if we had just called everything tree holes? Got it? But it's conveying the fact. It's conveying the feeling that I want. It is actually looking like. Now, another interesting thing is happening is this pale green that I'm doing here at the base of this mountain in much of this area in here is going actually on top of a slightly lavender-ish underpainting. And but I'm not obliterating it, I'm scumbling, doing translucent. And anytime, by the way, anytime that you can do contrasting colors on top of each other, our eyes really get a kick out of that. Because we would be extremely hard pressed to say what color is that right there. Because our brain is mixing lavender, a dull lavender with a dull pea green, I'll say. It's both colors piled up, and our brain goes buddy 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 buddy. We don't know what to call it. We like it. Our brain likes it a lot, but we hardly even know what to identify. It's actually some kind of brown, but it doesn't read to our eyes like brown. It reads like a beautiful color. Okay, now I suppose I'll just continue. Let's do this next hill. Coming forward, I'm going to wipe off these brushes. I'm not going to clean them. I'm just going to wipe them off with a tissue. Because right now this bank of trees is just a little too dark for what it's supposed to be. So I'm going to get it lighter and bluer. Hang on a second. This is a very soft edge right here. Believe it or not, I'm thinking about making it softer, but I'll come back to that later. Let's leave that for right now. So I'm going to put some tiny bit of phthalo blue. And by the way, if you know anything about painting, then tiny bit is the operative word when it comes to phthalo. A little phthalo goes a long way. I've heard some, actually decent painters, say, ew, I can't stand phthalo. Oh, terrible, terrible, terrible way to be. It's just because they haven't trained themselves how to handle phthalo. It's a staining color, so it behaves differently. There are a few colors like this. It's a staining color, so it behaves differently than many of the other suspended pigment colors. You run into this in watercolor a lot more. You have to know your difference between your staining colors and your suspended colors. A little bit more green. But yeah, do learn how to drive your phthalo blue. Earlier this evening, I talked for a while about how to avoid cadmiums, and I gave you my list of reds. Now let me talk about how to avoid cobalts. I don't need cobalt. So here again, I'm scumbling very lightly a dull bluish green on top of this dirty orange, brown, black, green. Those are all, I see all those colors in this intermediate hill. So I'm adding to all those colors now, sort of a universal bluish green. Let me step back and see if I like that. It's actually got to be just a little bit lighter. That surprises me. So I'm going to pull some Naples yellow into this mixture. Oh, and a little titanium white even. So now it's a little greener and a little lighter. Let me see if I like that better. Okay, so what blues this is? So in the red category, I told you permanent rose, naphthol crimson, and scarlet lake. Those are my reds. So I don't need cad red. Cobalt is easy. It's only 2 colors I need in the blue. And for 15 years now, maybe more, I've almost always had just 2 blues on my palette. And it is ultramarine, a good deep ultramarine, and a real phthalo blue. And more than once when I'm teaching an art class, I've asked to borrow somebody's cobalt blue, and I'll put a stroke of cobalt blue on a white background, and I'll mix up phthalo and ultramarine and in the right combination and put it down next, and people can't tell which is which. So I think that's a pretty good test. So I don't use cobalts either, and I don't miss them a bit. Not even a little bit. I'm going to get a dry brush up here and just actually blend. This is not good painting right here. Blendy, blendy, blendy. Usually not good painting. I tell students, no, 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 I don't want to hear that sound. Brushy, brushy, brushy is bad painting, but I just did it right there. My excuse is every rule can be broken. You just better know why you're breaking it. And normally after you do some scumbling like that, you understand that dry brush, I mean, what I'm doing right now is actually scumbling too, but what I did with a clean brush is even more scumbly, if you'll let me make up words. I'm going to do it again. Normally what you should do is come back with little bits of opaque paint on top of this scumbled area and do just a few strokes here and there of real paint, I'll call it. And usually that succeeds in eliminating the unpleasant texture created by pure scumbling. And let me take a look at that, see if I like it. Even using my finger, that is just like bush league. Don't paint with your fingers. I'm kidding. I paint with my finger all the time. Just every time I do it, I tell everybody, don't do it. And I know I keep getting in the way of your view here. Sorry about that. Just removing some of the blue that got on that shed. Okay, now, once again, while I've got this color mixed up, I need to come in here and do some more sky holes. What should have to be called intermediate hill holes. This is getting ridiculous. Paint some more of them intermediate hill holes, would you? Sure thing. That's just what I was going to do. I just about. Everybody loves intermediate hill holes. Oh, I hope you can't hear that music. I'll be getting a note from YouTube. You did not hear the Beach Boys right then. Good vibrations. It was just a figment of your imagination. Okay. I think that's all right. I am going to do just what I described to you a few minutes ago. I'm going to try to mix up an opaque version of this color. Whatever that color is, I'm going to try to mix up an opaque version of it, which means I'm adding some brown to it. The brown here comes from the underpainting. Now the brown I'm mixing up right now is a product of adding raw umber to this bluish stuff. Let's see if I'm close. Nope, too bright, too light. So, again, let you watch my mixing for a minute. And adding some ultramarine. I'm doing this with dirty brushes. Let's see where I am now. Am I close? I would love it if it's an exact match, but an opaque version of the exact match. It's not, but it's slightly lighter, and that's okay. So now, do you remember how I said that we, human beings, we do not really enjoy seeing that scumbled effect? Boy, I wish somebody had told me this 30 years ago, 40 years ago when I was in college. I would have learned it. I swear I would have said, what? Teach me more. We do not like that scumbled effect. Is a good on your way to something else, but it is not a good final texture. So I don't have to cover it all up. I just have to cover up little bits of it here and there, which is what I'm doing, and then we like it. So I'm covering it up with what I called a little while ago real painting. That is slabs, small slabs of opaque paint put on the canvas with some panache, with some boldness, with some confidence. Not not pussyfooting around, if you know that expression, which is what scumbling is, pussyfooting. It's what you do when you don't know what you're doing. You scumble. So, and it's okay to scumble at times to get the color like I did on that hill, but then you come back and do some real painting, which is where you slap some paint on the canvas and leave it be. You don't fiddle the thing to death. Just put it down and leave it. I'm going to leave that for right now, I think. And I'm just about ready actually to hang up and let you guys go. That's what the painting looks like at the moment. The sky gets a lot of attention. I'm going to do a little bit of green foliage, just a little bit in these trees. Maybe add a couple dark branches. I don't have to do much to this shed, but pump up that light coming through the window. Hit a little more reflection on this. The foreground, I'm going to have puddles. Oh, I should have, while I had these colors mixed up, I should have done my puddles, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead. So this is a road, as you can see, classic zigzag Z formation going into the scene. Classic. Edgar Payne. While I'm talking about Edgar Payne, classic cantilever. What does he call it? I'm drawing a blank. High shape, straight, short shape. It's driving me nuts. Again, Edgar Payne, I talk about him a lot. He's got a book, and in his book are the 12 or 13 designs. Steel yard. There we go. Steel yard. High thing, straight line, low thing. Classic Edgar Payne. Z formation. Classic Edgar Payne. One of the funny things about this painting, this composition, is that the focal point is almost dead center. The horizon's a little, this is the horizon, by the way. This is a mountain. Our eyes don't read that as horizon. If there was somebody standing in this scene, they'd be standing here. So it's a little bit high. Here's half, but here's I guess maybe it's a third if it's down there. And I'm okay with that, because one of the rules for composition is take the law of thirds and tweak it ever so slightly. If you follow the law of thirds slavishly, it becomes uncomfortable. Here's another, by the way, here's another cute little trick. And I'm taking more time than I wanted, but let me do this real quickly. I was doing this in front of a class, and I said, I'm going to add telephone poles. For want of a better term, I'm going to call them telephone poles. So I added one here, and I said, I think I'm going to add one on this side too. So here's, in front of the class, without thinking, I did this one right here. And then instantly I saw, oh rats, look at the distance between the edge and that pole is almost exactly the same as this. Bad news, right? So I simply fixed it by doing a double pole here, which, by the way, gives us just a little bit more visual texture, unexpected visual texture. So the two poles there actually work quite well. So now I have 3 poles. 3 is always better than 2 or 4, and so on. So that's enough. I'm going to hang up there and paint without you for just a little while, and maybe bring you in. This is going to be a pretty painting. It's a cliche, if you will. It's a classic, pretty. I'm playing all the rules. I'm pulling all the strings almost. Just tweaking it like this. Unusual. I have this so close to the center, but it's going to work. Okay. Thanks so much for watching. And I think I'll call this a wrap on this particular episode. And I'll be painting till I run out of gas tonight. Again, leave your comments. I look forward to hearing.